Welcome. Hi, everybody. We're just starting our recording. So welcome to User's Guide to the Soul. Let me know when we start recording, because it's like it's taking just a moment. And nod if you guys see the recording on your screens. Are we? Yeah, good. Welcome. We're discussing the power of joy and how to get away anything that is in the way of joy in a very detailed fashion. So I hope you'll join us for this class. We're wrapping up this class and maybe the next. This section, and then we move on to discussing joy itself, as opposed to how to get away things that are in the way of joy. But speaking of joy, yes, Noreen?
I just want to say it's really nice that we're doing joy today, just before the revelation of at Sinai.
Amen. So there's a lot of joy, and specifically, as we'll see, that's the joy of the divine soul. It gets excited about receiving this new Torah. So. Absolutely. Very good timing that it is the day before Shavuot. Tonight's Erev Shavuot. So today is the last day of counting the Omer. So for those who went through the whole process, we went through all of the Sfirot, the emotional ones, the Midot we call them, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchut, and how they inter-include each other one. So there's 49 total, because within Chesed is also Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, etc. So we did a stock taking of our whole emotional state. And today is the last day when you count what's called Malchut of Malchut, so royalty of royalty. And it receives the light from all the other days. So a beautiful day to do the counting if you haven't. If you do it with a blessing, you would do it normally in the nighttime. But you can still count as a mitzvah. And if you're watching today live at some point, just repeat after me. And anyone in class who has not counted, please repeat after me. Today is 49 days.
Is 49 days.
Which is 7 weeks.
Which is 7 weeks.
Of the Omer. And that's the basics of the mitzvah. And know that now our divine souls just popped out of their prison and are now enjoying the mitzvah. And as we are learning and creating great joy for God. And we want to learn how to tap into that joy, because that joy doesn't fade. That joy doesn't fade. It's funny. We're learning about the difference between the joy that the animal soul experiences, which is really klipa, which is really the other side. It's not holiness. And the joy that the divine soul is able to experience, which is from kedusha. Right? So one's from klipa, one's from kedusha. And if let's all if you can, let's all mute now so the background noise is lessened. And I think we all have the experience of understanding. We get that sadness is klipa, right? Because sadness is all about me, right? And we talked last week that when I'm sad and depressed, that's just about me. I'm depressed because this happened to me and I haven't gotten this. And it may be very reasonable, but still my reaction is all about me. I'm thinking about myself. So automatically, that's nefesh ba'amit and that's klipa. But even the joy that the animal soul experiences, because the animal soul experiences joy, right? My wife makes me a wonderful cake. I smell it, and my animal soul gets joyful, right? Even that joy is not true joy, like the kind we're describing about channeling, because the joy of the divine soul is a whole different thing. The joy of the divine soul is kedusha, and I'm out of the way. I'm not focused on myself. The joy of the animal soul is focused on myself. There was a study on people that won big lottery wins. Yeah, who we got? Dorian, if you wouldn't mind. We're good. There was a study on people that won big lottery numbers, and they experienced much more happiness in life after they won the lottery. I mean, you see people jumping around excited, so we that's clear. But as a rule, within 6 months, they measure the same level of happiness in their life as they did before they won the lottery. So the greatest joy of the material world, winning the lottery, you can buy anything, you totally transform your life. You'd think now you're set, boom. It didn't last, right? The animal soul's joy, it always wants the next thing. It always wants more. If I have 10 million, now I want 50 million. And it's not the kind of joy that the divine soul has, which is just permanent, sustained, and keeps growing and growing and growing, doesn't fade. Compare that to I started a different personal prayer practice maybe four years ago or so. So not just the prayers that I did at temple, but also daily stuff in a different way. And it's hard, right? I mean, everyone who does a daily practice, whether it's meditation or prayer exercise, you get up earlier in the day to do this thing, and you have to put yourself, and it's not fun, and you have to kind of like make yourself do it at times. But it's funny, there's very few things in my life I can say that every single time I've done them, I haven't looked back afterwards and said, you know what? I overdid it. I shouldn't have done it today. I would have spent my time better doing something else. It's very strange, but even after 4 years of getting up early and doing rather lengthy davening compared to what I used to do, say, I've never had the experience of saying, you know what? Would have been better to just sleep in today. Would have been better to just, have a longer breakfast or whatever. Every single time afterwards, even after 4 years, I say, that was the right way to start the day. I have an inner sense of joy because of it, and it's building. It's good. So I just say personally, we want to understand what the difference is even of the joy of the animal soul versus the divine soul. Because the more we, as we learned, press down, crush, and lower our attachment to the animal soul, the more we can start to identify with that joy of the divine soul, which is a totally different type of joy. It's Kedusha. Does that make sense? Yes, so we started this chapter saying, even if we're sad, because to recap, the last several chapters we've gone through and really said, if you have this problem of timtum halev, of apathy, you want to splinter the ego, splinter the animal soul by going through and looking at my spiritual state and looking at the reality of who I am, honestly, and how lowly I am. And that will splinter the animal soul so that then the divine soul, the light, can get through and catch fire, so to speak. Even if that gets me depressed, I shouldn't be worried. Why? Because that depression is going to be a springboard to lead to joy. And now the Alter Rebbe is giving us a technique, and a technique that's different from what we learned in chapter 26. If you remember 26, we learned, if you're upset about anything material, just recognize there's, you can go back and look at the class, there's a lower level of blessing and a higher level of blessing. Anything that I experience as a negative, it's just a higher level of blessing, and just thank God and be joyful. And that was our first technique at dealing with any material matter that causes depression, is to learn to see it as a higher blessing and to thank God and to approach it with joy. Here he's giving us a different technique where we're actually accepting the sadness that we're experiencing from some material matter, but now we're going to start to transition it from one state to the next, from one state to the next, from one state to the next. And if we follow what he did, right, first he said, depression is completely klipa. If I'm sad, if I'm crying, if I'm in that state, I have no energy. That's total klipa, and I'm not going to be able to necessarily just jump to joy from that, which is what we learned in chapter 26, right? If I'm experiencing apathy, now I got to use the related emotion, because we know how emotions are kind of they relate to each other, right? If I'm depressed, and now my friend tells me a sob story about their life, then I start crying for them, right? And we're both depressed and crying, and I relate to it. If I'm happy and I hear about somebody else's wonderful thing, I'm happy for them. But if I'm in a really happy state in the middle of a beautiful thing and I hear something sad about someone, it's kind of like you have trouble relating directly, right? And the opposite, obviously. If I'm really, really down, depressed, I hear good news about something, and I'm like, oh, wonderful for them, right? It's hard for emotions to make the leap to the very opposite. It's easier for them to transition to kind of a neighboring emotion that's related. So that's what the Alter Rebbe says. He says, first of all, atzvut, sadness, depression, that is, welcome iPhone. Sadness is total klipa, and we want to always get away from that. But the next thing to get out of is from sadness about physical things to sadness about spiritual things. Right? So he said, if you're sad about physical things, the next easiest thing to get to get to move to is to move from sadness of physical things to sadness about spiritual things. And why? Sadness about physical things is total klipa, right? If I'm sad because I lost my wallet and it's a drag and I got to replace my cards and I lost, $30 in it and I got to buy a new wallet. I'm just depressed, right? That's all klipa. That's just, understandable, but that's just me. So the Alter Rebbe says, okay, if you're depressed, Smolash, about something physical, let's get you to step 2 of the ladder and get you depressed about something spiritual. So sit down for an hour and go through what your spiritual state is and how you speak to people and how you behave and how you behaved your life. Do a stock taking of your spiritual state. And you'll find once you're done, you care less about your wallet because that's just physical stuff, right? And you're more concerned, my goodness, look at my soul's condition here, right? A serious person, when they look at their spiritual state, is going to suddenly be drawn in by that and will stop caring as much about the physical issue that's bothering them. And that was the last 2 chapters, right? That was going through and finding all these techniques for really hammering what my spiritual state is and really forcing myself to look at it. And when I'm done, I don't care about the wallet. So good, what have I done? I've moved from total klipa, where I'm stuck with no energy, and I moved to the next state, which is klipas noga. Because now I'm upset, I'm sad, but I'm sad about spiritual stuff. So it's klipa, but as we learn, it's klipa with a bit of light in it, with a bit of holiness embedded in it, and that we can work with, right? So I couldn't leap to joy, but I could leap from depression about physical to depression about spiritual. Now what do? I'm still on the side of klipa, and I want to now get to kedusha. So if you got sadness about physical, sadness about spiritual, and that's all klipa, but it's klipa and klipas noga. Now I want to make the leap, again, not directly to joy, because I'm still depressed. I'm just depressed about the spiritual. I'm still thinking about myself. Yeah, I'm depressed that I don't pray long enough. Yeah, I'm depressed that I don't, take care around the house enough and make my family happy. Yeah, I'm depressed that I don't love a fellow Jew the way I should. But it's still thinking about my spiritual state. Although it's higher, perhaps, it's still self-centered. So we haven't left the animal soul yet. We've just transitioned to the part of the animal soul that's got some light in it. Now I want to jump, as we learned last week, from depression, atzvut, about spiritual matters, to the next connecting emotion, which is not joy, but is bitterness, marirus. Bitterness, like maror, right? And so that I start to hammer my animal soul with a bit of the hair of the dog that bit me, right? And I really try and hammer my animal soul and say, it's not about me. Let's really focus on what needs to be done. Let's focus on the other, and get myself from a state of depression about spiritual matters to bitterness, by even getting, as we said, I think, I forget which chapter, by getting the divine soul to kind of scold and yell at the animal soul and really give it a dressing down, right? And at that point, we learn to jump from depression about spiritual to bitterness. And what is bitterness? Bitterness is finally kedusha. Bitterness is finally, I've left the realm of the self-centered animal soul, and I've now toggled to the divine soul, right? And if you look at my teacher labels techniques, that's always the technique. His anger technique. Why is the other person doing or saying what they're doing or saying? It's a sidebar for those who haven't heard it. Gets me to focus on the other. That moment where I transition from sadness about my spiritual state to bitterness that what's going on is not happening properly. I'm not contributing to something else. Now I've moved from animal soul to divine soul, but it's the gevura of the divine soul, right? It's the strength, the might, the fear of the divine soul that I've activated. But now I'm finally in kedusha. So we've had 3 steps to get us out of sadness. First, really making myself look at my spiritual state to get to sadness about spiritual. Now really giving my animal soul a lecture or a bit of a scolding to get to marira, bitterness. And now from bitterness, we're learning a meditation that will actually finally bring us to joy. And not just joy instead of sadness, but joy that is more powerful because of the initial sadness. And that's the beauty of this chapter, is that we even bring the sadness in, and the sadness, because it increased our joy, now there's no reason to be upset about having been sad, because it actually added to my joy. And this final meditation takes us from bitterness, finally now to the joy of the divine soul, which is a much higher joy than I get from a chocolate cake. So that's the technique in a nutshell that we're learning in this chapter. It's a very sophisticated way of understanding human emotions and giving us a pathway to not just think, just fake it till you make it and start being happy even though I'm depressed, but really unclogging the system, moving to the next emotion, which is now in Kedusha, and finally getting back to Chesed of Kedusha, which is joy. And we learn what that joy is that the soul, the divine soul, is an actual piece of God. It's a piece of God. And the meditation we're learning is based on focusing on that piece of God has been trapped inside this body and this animal soul, right? It's functioning through that vessel, and really looking at the state of that spark of God that's been through all those mistakes that I've made, and recognizing how horrible it must feel, as if it was a prince that was kidnapped and imprisoned in a horrible dungeon with bread and water and cold floor and no clothing and just a bucket for cleanliness. And this prince, who was used to the finest life and being near the king and queen, has to live for years in this prison. Imagine the joy that prince feels when the prince is freed and reunited with his family and back in his royal status and enjoying what that life is. It'd be a much higher, more intense kind of joy than the joy that he felt just waking up in the morning on a normal day when he hadn't been kidnapped. Of course, the prince appreciates the luxury of being a prince and being near the king and the queen. But how much more joy will the prince feel after being kidnapped and missing it and now being reunited? It's a whole other level of joy. So we say, yes, my divine soul is imprisoned in this body, but I'm going to make it my aim to identify with that soul and free it. How? By what we're doing now, by learning Torah, by doing mitzvahs at Temple Israel, and then understanding that when I do that, that's that moment of freedom for the divine soul, that it's released from its captivity, and then identifying with that joy because I've already crushed and lessened my ego, my animal soul. Does that give a kind of a picture of this technique? Because we've spent, it's a few chapters that we've kind of bundled in, and I want you to see where he's going. It's like a different way of accessing joy when you're depressed than we initially learned in 26. So it's like a separate path that's available. Any questions about that before we go inside? Now let's start where we left off. I think we're on 422. Anyone remember the exact sentence we finished on? Let's start at the top. I like the top. Lemor lelibo emet hu ken bli safek she'ani rachok me'od me'Hashem betachlit mishukatz u'mitoav chulu. Let's go with the order changed. So we moved around, so I don't know the order anymore. You want me to just call it out again? Yeah. Let's start with Noreen, please. Noreen, go ahead with the Hebrew, with the English. Let him say, and then Rick, then Dan, then Paula, then Ellen.
Let him say to his heart, indeed, without a doubt, I am far removed, utterly remote from God, and am despicable, contemptible, and so on. All
right, so we did this last week, right? It's okay, it's true. I went through those two chapters. I got it. I'm a bum. I'm low. I messed up. I'm the lowest person on earth, right? Okay, understood. Kol ze hu ani levadi, hu haguf im nefesh hachiyunit shebo. Rick? Rick, do you want to unmute yourself? You having trouble with your unmute?
I got it. But all this is true only of me. That is my body and the animating soul within it.
Right, so all that focus on splintering myself That self, as we learned, is the nefesh be'amit. And it's just that part, that me is the lowly me. But there's a second me, which we want to consider here. And that gets us from bitterness now to joy. אבל מכל מקום יש בקרבי חלק השם ממש, שישנו אפילו בקל שבקלים שהיא נפש אלוקית עם ניצוץ אלוקות ממש, המלובש בו להחיותה.
Yet within me, there is a veritable part of God, which is present even in the most worthless of my fellows. So even if I am no better than he, I still have this part of God within me, namely the divine soul and the spark of godliness itself clothed in it, animating it.
So this is something, even though I just learned that I'm lower than every person, for reasons you can review in the past classes, still every one of us has this spark of God that is just across the board. So it doesn't matter how low I am, my divine soul is infinite. It's a spark of God, and that's trapped within me. And Paula, well, if you can unmute, we'll have you read next. I'll do the Hebrew. And remember, the godliness is enclosed in the divine soul, and the divine soul has to be enclosed in the animal soul. So that's why it's always trapped. I have this ego consciousness, and trapped behind that, within it, is this spark of godliness, and enclosed in that is God. So God here is exiled down within my consciousness and my mistakes. And if you seriously consider that, you have a whoa moment. That should be my aim, to identify with the feelings of that soul and to help that soul experience its joy. And I can now go along for the ride, and it's amazing. Rak shehi bivchinat galut. Paula, if you want to unmute, please. Yeah, Paula, they'll be in, there you go.
It is only that when the body and animating soul are in such a lowly state, the divine soul is in exile within them.
Right? So the issue is not that all of me is lowly, right? It's just my animal soul that's lowly. And the only reason the divine soul is now also lowly is because it got dragged down with it. So it's now trapped in it. But I can undo that, right? We know how to undo that, and then we can experience the joy of what that feels like. ואם כן, אדרבה, כל מה שאני בתכלית הריחוק מהשם והטיוב ושיקוץ, הרי נפש אלוקית שבי בגלות גדול יותר, והחרמנות עליה גדולה מאוד.
If so, then, on the contrary, the further I am removed from God, and the more despicable and contemptible.
הרי נפש אלוקית שבי בגלות גדול יותר, והרחמנות עליה גדולה מאוד. Let's do Maxine, please. The deeper
in exile is my divine soul, and all the more it is to be pitied.
So there's actually an inverse relation, right? I got depressed because of how lowly I was. And then I'm saying, well, hold on, this is Kabbalah and Hasidus, shouldn't I be happy? Isn't depression a problem? And the Alter Rebbe says, it's not a problem. In fact, the more depressed you are, the more effective is this meditation going to be that will bring you to joy. And the more powerful will be the joy. Because the worse the dungeon that the prince was confined in, the more intense the joy that he experiences on being reunited with his family, right? If he's just, taken captive by another political rival, and he's given a castle to live in, but he can't leave, and he's given servants and good food and a good bed, and he just, he's worried for his life, perhaps. And life wasn't so bad. When he gets back home, he's like, thank God, that's over. But if it was really a dungeon, a horrible dungeon with filth everywhere, and he had lice and couldn't cut his hair and didn't have food and came out, just tortured. Now the joy of being reunited is, there'll be tears. It'll be something totally on another level. So the sadness that I experienced, it's going to become a source of even more intense joy. And the worse the sadness was, the higher the joy will be. לזה אשים כל מגמתי וחפצי להוציאה ולהעלותה מגלות זה La Shiva El Beit Aviha Kinureha. And this is Karen, please. Karen, then Cindy, then Doreen, then Joey.
I can't find it on my phone. I need to get a book, so just skip me. I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah. Did you get an email from Maya? Have you got?
Yeah, but I thought it was 32 and now it's 31 and I can't find it on my phone.
Okay, sorry about that. Cindy, go ahead.
Therefore, I will make it my entire aim and desire to extricate it from this exile and to return her to her father's house, that is, to restore it to its source in its original state as in her youth.
Right, as we said, this is the quote from talking about the daughter of a Kohen who then marries outside the Kohen tribe, can't eat sacrificial meat anymore. And then if for some reason that marriage ends and she comes back, now she's restored to that status and can eat of the temple sacrifices. So again, that's talking about the soul really reuniting with God and being united with that sense of joy at being able to serve God and do mitzvahs and love another Jew and not express anger, all that stuff that the divine soul just, it's in its element. Yes, Cindy?
The thought keeps coming back to me about when you were talking about the prince that was exiled, right? And the fact that the situation we're in right now, when you think about, at least myself personally, when I think about the joy of being able to come to a place, to come to temple, to be reunited with everyone that we haven't seen, that we've only seen virtually over months, it feels like a prison right now. And therefore, like that freedom and that joy that we took for granted previously will have a whole different level to it. And I don't know if you see that as a parallel or not, but I kind of do.
Yeah, very much a parallel in that we can appreciate everything. And as we, now we can have gatherings of 10 that are socially distanced. And how nice is it to be able to have a simple gathering, even though I'm 6 feet away with a mask on? How nice is it to be able to do that? And we appreciate each other's company in a different way. But it's not necessarily the joy of the divine soul that we're re-experiencing. It's also the joy of the animal soul, right? So part of it is just my animal soul re-appreciating the stuff that's been missing, right? So there is a parallel and then there isn't a parallel, right? Because if my joy at being released from quarantine when that happens is, to go to 6 Points or go to Disneyland and have an amazing holiday, because that's what I've been craving, I'm sure I'll enjoy it, but we're talking about, the ability to come to temple and be at services and say the Shema with the group. That's the joy of the divine soul. So there's a little bit of a distinction to make as well. Does that ring true? קודם שנתלבשה בגופי שהייתה נכללת באורו יתברך ומיוחדת עמו בתכלית. So Doreen, you didn't want to read, it looks like? Okay. Joey, go ahead. Yeah, Doreen, you're muted. So is something I need to know before Joey starts?
Yeah, somebody else should read it. I just lost it on my phone, the pages, so I'm a mess.
Okay, we're top of 423. Doreen, you're muted. Is there something you need to tell me? You'd have to unmute. Okay, good. Let's start with Noreen again.
That is, as it was before, being clothed in my body, when it was completely absorbed in God's light and united with him.
That's the perspective of the divine soul all the time, right? It knows that it's united with God, it's part of God, but still it can be exiled and trapped in this body. And so you have this soul that only cares about being united with God, only cares about doing good things and other-centered stuff, and it's being forced to go along for the ride and do the opposite. And it's torture. It's like that prison. So my divine soul that's been trapped in my ego all this time, and all I thought about is self-centered stuff, it's like that prince that's being in the worst dungeon, in the lowest place. וגם אתה כן תהיה כלולה מיוחדת בו יתברך, כשאשים כל מגמתי בתורה ומצוות, להלביש בהן כל 10 בחינותיה כנזכר לאל. Rick.
Now too will it likewise be absorbed and united with him once again, when I concentrate all my aspirations on the Torah and the mitzvot in an effort to clothe therein all of the soul's 10 faculties, that is, by applying my mental faculties to Torah study and my emotive faculties to the performance of the mitzvot, with the vitality lent them by the love and fear of God, as explained above in chapter 4, thus will my divine soul be united with God.
And so it was outlined in chapter 4. We're going to have beautiful, beautiful meditations and practices in like the 36, 37, 38 about how to really amplify this effect and create tremendous joy by recognizing what happens when I just learn Torah or do a mitzvah. As we know, the dynamic is when I learn Torah, my Chokhmah Bin and Dat is fusing with Chokhmah Bin and Dat of the Ein Sof. So my intellect, even though it feels like it's just another subject consciously, and I could be learning geography, and I might enjoy learning geography, geography is just information about the world. Torah, Kabbalah says, is God's intellect. And especially a text like this, it's a very, very lofty form. It's like the life force of God's intellect. And when I learn it, my intellect and the divine intellect are being fused. And of course, for the divine soul, that is the greatest joy. It's just incomparable. And you can't even, it's not on the same level as joy over any physical thing that's just gonna, you get used to it and it'll fade, right? You never get used to fusing your mind with infinity, right? It just always creates more and more and more joy. You can always count on it. It's a different quality of joy because I'm not there. I'm out of the way. And also my emotions, right? If the more I have joy doing it, the more my emotions are fused with the divine emotions. And that's especially doing a mitzvah. When I put a coin in a tzedakah box or I hand food, with my gloves on to a family at temple, that's entering into my whole physical being. And my whole physical being is start to flow with the emotions of God. And that for the divine soul, it's why the divine soul came down here. It's such a, yes. The divine soul loves that. So as I said, we're learning to shift from sadness, which is totally self-centered, to sadness about the spiritual, to bitterness, to finally this meditation where we say, the point of the bitterness was now to start doing something and recognizing what the joy of the divine soul is. To highlight that, there's a story that's told about, I think it's Reb Chacha Fagan. That's who I heard it told about. He was a mashpia, which means a spiritual mentor from Russia, during the time of the KGB. And it really highlights kind of that move from sadness over physical or spiritual to bitterness, which is active. He was having what's called a Verbringen, which is a sort of a gathering where an elder Hasidic person will tell stories and sing songs, but also kind of lecture other younger Hasidim about how they could do better. And sometimes it's really happy and freilich. Sometimes it's very stern, and you have to learn more, pray more, work on yourself. This is really like how we model for younger people in this system. So Mr. Fagan was having a Verbringen in the middle of, Soviet Russia or KGB Russia, and they were in a cellar somewhere, kind of crowded around, and they had a sentry stationed outside to check if anybody was coming by because they could be jailed or killed for this. And he was really, in this case, was giving them, the nature of the Verbringen was he was giving them a hard time. He was really, really for them and saying, how they weren't doing enough, and they had to do better, and they had to work on this. He was very sincere, and all the young Bochum were very sincere, and they just started crying. They were so upset about their spiritual state that they just started crying. They were weeping. And in the middle of this scene, at one point, the guard comes in and says, "Look out, KGB is down the block." Right? So immediately they scramble. The whole place comes apart, and maybe two people rush up to to the living room of the house and start playing cards. And one person dives under the table, and two people go to take a nap with a newspaper on top of their heads, and they hide all the vodka. And, there's a mad scramble to just disassemble the whole thing. And then 10 minutes later, the sentry comes back and says, actually, they took a turn. They went to another block. They're gone now. You're good. And so they pull everything out. They put the fish and the vodka back on the table. And Reb Fagan looks at them and he says, what do we learn here? Isn't that interesting? When I was telling you that you had a spiritual issue and your souls were not in the right state, your souls were in danger, you started crying. And what was that going to do? How was crying a solution? You weren't fixing anything. You were just upset. The moment you learned that you were in physical danger, that there was a physical issue and your physical body was not where it should be, you scrambled, you were very productive, very active. You suddenly started moving. What's that about? Why the difference? Why your spiritual state was in danger? And the young people said, well, there wasn't time. I mean, the KGB was here. We couldn't stop to cry and think about that. We just had to run and hide. And then Rafega said, yes, don't you understand? That's the same thing that should happen with the spiritual. When I find out that I'm in a poor spiritual state, when I've done that soul searching that's gotten me out of the depression, now I don't want to stay depressed about it. Now I want to get to bitterness. I want to be able to have the same reaction as I would if a KGB agent was knocking on the door because I did something wrong, right? Ooh, scramble. And that's the move from depression over spiritual to bitterness over spiritual. And that's the difference of the state. I'm not thinking about myself. Whoa, scramble, do something, right? Get up, start a prayer practice, start learning, do some extra things that make me happy. Express love for another fellow Jew. So very powerful tools to get us from one state to the other. And let's get back to our meditation on the joy itself. 10 faculties. Uvifrat b'mitzvah tefillah litzok el Hashem batzar l'Hashem migaluta begufi ha-meshukatz lotzia mi-masger uledavka bo yibarech. I think we're at Paula. Is it you now or Dan? Dan, did you read?
No, I think I'm up.
Okay, Dan.
Especially in fulfilling the mitzvah of prayer, will I try to release my divine soul by crying out to God because of the distress of his exile in my loathsome body, so that he release it from captivity and bind it to himself.
All right, so especially in prayer, that's our chance. We say when we pray, that's the moment of leaving Egypt of each day. So whatever if it's just the Shema in the morning, I should know and reinforce every day that although my soul is trapped in this vessel of my ego and my body, that when I say the Shema, I may not be conscious of it, but my soul is able to leap back up and be, here I am back in the spiritual side. Here I am back with the light of God. I'm not confined in the ego anymore. And that's a moment of great liberation for the soul, so much so that's compared to leaving Egypt. When we say that we should see ourselves if we left Egypt, in fact, every day, that's the moment when we really do. When I say the Shema, I know that my soul is now liberated to be an ensouled consciousness rather than a soul that's trapped in a body. V'zohi b'chinat tshuva u'ma'asim tovim. Paula, please, this service. And if you'll unmute, you want to unmute. There you go.
This service of God, in which one seeks to restore the soul to its source, is referred to as teshuvah with good deeds.
Yes, it's a term from the Talmud, tshuva with good deeds, and it's talking about not tshuva like Yom Kippur, that I did something wrong and I have to apologize and I have to now be forgiven and then I can reconnect. Not the basic low level of tshuva of addressing a sin, but tshuva with good deeds means just returning to a state where I'm connected to God to begin with. So even if I don't have actual sins, because this is a Beinoni we're talking about, so there's no technical sins to repent to, there's still a sense of connecting and identifying with the emotions of the divine soul, and therefore having a source for unlimited joy, as opposed to the joy of the animal soul, which is fleeting, come and go, and is prone to depression and always wants more. Shehen ma'asim tovim. שעושה כדי להשיב חלק השם למקורה ושורשה דכל עלמין. Ellen, please.
This denotes the good deeds which one does with the intention of returning the soul, which is part of God, to the divine source and root of all the worlds.
Yeah, so that's tshuva, not by repenting from wrong things, but tshuva by doing Jewish things for the sake of reuniting my divine soul with God and supercharging the divine soul's emotions. Yeah, so just all positive. Yeah, just total return to that state of immense joy. וזאת תהיה עבודתו כל ימיו בשמחה רבה. היא שמחת הנפש בצאתה מהגוף, מה תאהב ושבה אל בית אביה כי נעוריה בשעת התורה והעבודה. Sue Ellen, please, go ahead. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Maxine, go ahead, Maxine.
This then should be one's lifelong aim in the service of God with great joy. The joy of the soul upon leaving the loathsome body and returning during one's study of Torah and service of God through prayer to her Father's house as in her youth, to the unity with God that it enjoyed before it descended into the body.
Yeah, so that's the focus in the meditation that will get me from a state of bitterness where I'm active to now a state of joy where I say, well, good, right? So I have this spark of God trapped in me. Start working, and let me. I now know how to elevate that, and now this bitterness will lead to all kinds of new freedom and new joy for the divine soul, and that'll be this most intense joy that I couldn't have without the sadness. And it's highlighted by what's happening tonight. So we say it's Erev Shavuot, and of course it's the culmination of why we were brought out of Egypt to begin with. So a very nice time to learn this. That he'll go on to describe the divine soul coming out of the body as Yetzias Mitzrayim, coming out of Egypt. So it's really embedded in his chapter here. And we came out of Egypt to 7 weeks later to receive the Torah. So here we are now at the pinnacle of why we came out of Egypt. A beautiful time to learn this. And some people have a tradition tonight. We have Tikkun Leil Shavuot online at Temple that you're most welcome to participate in. It's all kinds of great learning. But some people have a tradition of staying up all night and learning Torah tonight. The tradition is because the morning when the Torah was given, the Jews were all sleeping, and God came down to give the Torah and saw everybody asleep and thought, nice welcome for, our wedding day when I'm giving you the Torah, you're all asleep. So to make up for it, we stay up all night learning Torah so we can receive the new Torah that's coming down, call it tomorrow morning, in a state where we've repaired that. And what is that? It's exactly what we're talking about. Who likes to stay up all night on purpose, right? It's the worst thing. You wake up in the morning, you call your friend, you turn to your spouse, whoever it is, how'd you sleep? Oh, I was up until 4 a.m. It was awful. I couldn't fall asleep. It's the worst thing, and your whole next day is ruined. Who wants to do that? The body hates that. Sleep is one of the biggest pleasures. If you've ever had trouble sleeping, the body loves sleep. And here we are, the night of a festival, and we're forcing our body to stay up all night to learn Torah. So we're exactly harnessing this technique. We're saying, physical, that's less important. I'm going to crush that. I'm going to focus less on that, even though my body's going to kick back and say, you know what? You're not in charge here. It's not about you. I'm going to focus on learning Torah all night, recognizing that my divine soul gets higher and higher and higher and more joyful, even though I'm experiencing physical discomfort and psychological discomfort. The divine soul is in another place. And I'm going to learn to identify with that such that eventually in the morning when I hear the 10 Commandments chanted, now I'm in the perfect state to do that. And you get this burst of joy that has nothing to do, believe me, if you stayed up all night and now you're groggy and tired and grumpy, that joy has nothing to do with the joy of the animal soul. So we're separating, we're lowering the body and the animal soul, and then we're isolating and elevating the divine soul. And all all wrapped up with this journey of the 7 weeks after Pesach, getting us to Shavuot tonight. It really illustrates what we're learning perfectly. Yeah? Any thoughts on that? Any questions or reflections? Yes, Maxine.
It seems like before we learned that it was the divine soul that sort of controlled the animal soul. And now it seems like the animal soul is controlling the divine soul.
Yes. Okay, so you're right that what we learn with the Beinoni is that thought, speech, and action should always flow with the divine soul. And so that it's true, that's the state of a Beinoni, that they haven't allowed the animal soul to actually say something that was a technical sin, or even think something that was a technical sin. So the divine soul is still in charge of speech and action, but those are just the garments of the soul, right? So the Beinoni has learned how to control the garments of the soul, thought, speech, and action. But here we're talking about my emotions and how excited I am about doing that thought, speech, and action, because thoughts are behavior, right, for us. And there, the Beinoni doesn't have control, right? There, it's the insides of the soul that we're talking about. We want to unclog those so that the Beinoni can experience, or even us can experience, the conscious joy of doing what the divine soul likes to do. So in this case, in a Beinoni, the divine soul is in charge of thought, speech, and action, but the animal soul still rules the emotions to a large extent, right? And the animal soul is the more emotional of the two souls between them. So it's powerful with its emotions. So we're just teaching a Beinoni to unclog the dense emotions of the animal soul that get in the way, so that then it can have the emotional reality of what the divine soul is experiencing, even though it wasn't getting through to the consciousness emotionally of the Beinoni. So that speak to what you asked?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
Good. Anyone else? Any thoughts or questions or insights? And just a little time for a little more. Sorry, remind me where we are? This corresponds. Are we at Karen, I think?
Okay, got it finally. This corresponds to the statement of our sages that one ought to engage in teshuva throughout his life.
Right, so we're told in Shabbat that we should do tshuva all the time, every day. But if I'm a Beinoni, why should I do tshuva, right? If I'm a Beinoni, I haven't sinned, then maybe tshuva is just for a rasha, for a normal person, a regular person. Beinoni is also a normal person, but functioning at a high level. Why should a Beinoni do tshuva if they've never sinned? It's this kind of tshuva. It's the tshuva of just returning my divine soul to God, and then experiencing that joy from the divine soul. Cindy, please.
Surely there is no joy as great as that of being released from exile and captivity. It is comparable to the joy of a prince who was taken captive and was subjected to the hard labor turning the millstone in prison while covered with filth.
I forgot the millstone. Yeah, when we talk, I forgot he's also turning a millstone all day long. 13 hours a day of turning this millstone, right? So there you go. I'm not a good prison maker in my imagination. So imagine, the prince finally wakes up and doesn't have to turn the millstone that day. And what a joy to just be able to, have breakfast with his royal family. V'yetza lechavshi el beit aviv hamelech. Joey?
And who then goes free to the house of his father, the king?
Yeah, so that's the divine soul. Anytime we do that's divine soul right now, while we're learning the Tanya, all of our divine souls we should know. And if we can get an inner sense, there's tremendous joy being generated here by this group.
So I heard once that, and correct me if this is the wrong story, that he was told that turning that millstone was actually a mitzvah because it was doing something good, and then come to find out that that millstone was actually doing.
Yeah, that makes another point. Because here the divine soul is being let out, and it's not looking back and having a heart attack because it realizes that the millstone was just there was nothing going on. That was to make the point that say when we do work, we need to see that it's we suffer more when there seems to be no purpose to our suffering. But if there's purpose to our suffering, now we can actually approach it with a sense of joy, right? But in this case, we're talking at a different point, which is that the joy being released is even greater, whereas in that case, it was making another point. But yeah, we did tell that story in the class. It's a good place to stop. I think we'll have one more class to finish this, and then we'll be on to, it's called Perek Lev, the 32nd chapter, which is considered the heart of the Tanya, so a beautiful chapter. And it's all about using what we just learned to not just experience joy, but to be able to love another Jew at all times in the best way possible. And the author has put this in the heart of the Tanya, and he called it chapter 32 because that's Lev. Lamed Beit is 32. So we'll see that this technique that we've been through, as hard as it was, is not just there to generate joy of a different nature than our normal ego joy, but also is a pathway to loving another Jew, loving another person, just effortlessly in the most beautiful way. I think you'll love it. It's one of my favorite chapters. And I'm going to try and actually make it part of Temple's virtual programming. So we may have that one on Facebook Live rather than just on Zoom, because it's a chapter that I think everyone can benefit from.
Can you tell me which Tanya? I know there's a specific one that I need to order.
Yeah, so the same one, it'll look like this. It's the only one that looks like this. And it's the Lessons in Tanya.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the latest edition. So you'll see there's an older one that's like beige. I don't have it right here. But the one with the black and the cream color, that's the one you want. You want volume 2 of the 5-volume set.
Okay.
And you go to the same
Right.
place, the Kohot, right? So if you look at that, that's the Kohot. That's their label.
Okay.
You can look up
Okay.
on, it's KOHOT, and they got a website. And within 6 months with COVID delivery, they should have it right at your doorstep.
Yeah, there's a lot of choices on Amazon to choose from.
Good.
I was really surprised. So,
It's
all
a
right.
popular book. Yeah.
Mhm.
All right, so
Thank
let's
you.
finish with our regular long short path. Just do a couple minutes. Let's find a calm position. And perhaps just feel the weight of all your muscles hanging off your bones, just like wet laundry kind of hanging off of a clothesline. Just kind of got no buoyancy, just falls away effortlessly. Your bones can be long and tall, but all those muscles, they don't have to do any work right now. Yeah, including arms, legs, belly. Even the muscles of your face should be smooth. Let your breathing slow and expand. Let's breathe together on a count of 4, breathing in. 2, 3, 4, and on. Stay there. 2, 3, 4. Back out. 2, 3, 4. Keep the breath out. 2, 3. Start again in. And this is our wisdom gateway at the end of the in-breath. And breathing out. Stay there. Keep that pattern going and try and, as you flow through this cycle of your breath, try and sort of remain spiritually in that wisdom gateway. And let that wisdom gateway open up into the joy we'll experience at receiving a whole new Torah. And recognize that the divine soul is freed from captivity and is sending tremendous bursts of infinite joy into our consciousness. And I might make it my aim over the next 48 hours of Shavuot and Shabbat of just attuning to that joy, letting that be the me that I identify with and the emotions I identify with. Let that stay in that wisdom gateway. Any other thought that enters your mind, let this thought swell and expand in details and color until it's the only thing that fills the mind. As we open our eyes, as we come up, let this be an anchor. You have just an impression of what it means to identify with the divine soul. And if at any point over the next couple of days we find my animal soul kicks or gives me a trouble, or there's any negative anything, you just come back to this anchor and know, wow, just recognizing Shavuot and Shabbat, the divine soul is in heaven with that, has so much joy, and I can have that be my own emotional state as well. It's a beautiful tool. Thank you for joining us. This ends our recorded portion of the class. I hope you'll join again next week. And then, God willing, in 2 weeks, we'll learn chapter 32, really the lev, the heart of the Tanya. It's going to be an amazing start to us focusing fully on the joy aspect. Yeah, so we're turning off our recording.
Hey, goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, Cantor.